We should get a literal. Yeah, no, that was good.
You could order a clap.
What do you call that?
Clapper?
You know, yeah.
I know what you mean. I feel like you could almost get it from like a costume shop. You know?
Yeah, I'm gonna find one.
You got nothing to prove, nothing to prove.
Well, welcome to the Nothing to Prove, Only to Share podcast. My guest today is Dylan Hicks. Hi, Dylan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Super excited. I've seen you a couple times live, and they've been incredible experiences, but I don't really know much about you. If you want to give us a little background.
Well, I was born in 1970, so I'm 52 now, in Austin, Texas. But my biological parents were divorced when I was quite young. I don't remember them being together, but they were, both part of my life. My mother and stepfather moved here to Minneapolis in 1982, or 3 rather. I was 12.
Okay.
So that's like, it was quite a lot of moving around before that. And in terms of my musical background, I did take some piano lessons we were in Idaho Falls, Idaho. It's a small city in eastern Idaho. But that piano didn't travel with us to Minneapolis, so those lessons were interrupted. But I guess I got a little bit of a foundation. It wasn't a lot. I wasn't a terribly disciplined or prodigious pianist. But I guess I learned a little bit about reading and writing music and some stuff and some fingering that I, picked up again later. My stepdad is a amateur, mostly amateur acoustic guitarist, and he's a good musician. So there was that around, and also all of my parents were interested in music. So
cool.
My biological dad had a lot of hip jazz records from the late 50s and early 60s when he was in college, and that was, a lot of jazz artists were relatively fashionable with college set, so Miles Davis and Sonny Rollins and modern jazz quartet, and a lot of stuff like this that at that time the album was kind of obsolete. So this was the mid 80s. So I didn't steal them, but I was just, I was able to liberate them from my grandparents' house without objection. So.
Love that. So your family was pretty supportive of you pursuing music?
Yeah, I mean, they really were. They wanted me to go to college, and I did go to college. I didn't do I didn't have a very good first run there. I was asked to leave. Not for bad behavior, just for I was put on academic probation.
Sure.
But I did return later. They were always really supportive. Always came to my concerts, and I think they were, like anybody, maybe a little, they were hoping I'd have something more secure too. But they didn't pressure me to choose something more secure.
Sure.
And they always really were supportive emotionally in terms of like being affirming of what I was doing, so I was fortunate in that way. I didn't really define myself as a musician when I was a teenager. I was really more of a fan.
Okay.
I loved reading about music. I loved reading music criticism and history, and I was a volunteer DJ at a community station where, as it happens, I met my wife, Nina Hale, who was also a volunteer. So that was also formative because there were a lot of older than people who were older than I was, who were interested in music and knowledgeable about it. But I was really thinking maybe I could become like a writer, a journalist, or a critic, or maybe a scholar, more than a player. Didn't feel like I had a lot of, like I say, I wasn't a technically advanced player as a kid. I'm still not, and that's not really how I envisioned myself until a little bit later in life. I thought maybe I could do that. So my parents didn't have to dissuade me from exactly like,
sure.
Ma, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be, Nashville's biggest singing phenomenon. And, no, you ain't, you're going to get that, I don't even know where this came from. We were in Minneapolis, but I think they thought maybe I would maybe have an obscure teaching position, where I'd teach the history of American folk music or something like that.
When you did go to school, what were you planning to study?
Well, the first time that was part of the problem. You know,
Okay.
I wasn't planning to studying
Sure,
or
okay.
studying without plans. I was a history major, and
Okay.
I nearly finished the second time. Then I got a job, and we had a kid, and I was in journalism at that time, and I thought, well, there's a career, there's a field that's not in jeopardy. I'm already doing it. But yeah, I didn't study music in college. I was a history major, and I usually was, I did better in the liberal arts classes. I struggled with math and science, and I think when I was younger, I used to think it was because I just didn't put in the effort, and there was some of that. But I think just also intellectually, I just have a harder time. It's hard for me to get those ideas are harder for me to. Somehow I can kind of grasp music theory a bit, which overlaps with some of that stuff, but sometimes that can be hard for me too.
Yeah, sure. So when did you start taking it more seriously, or when did you decide that maybe you wanted to pursue it in a deeper way?
Well, so when I had a weird internship at between my freshman and sophomore year of college. This was 1990. And my stepmother was working for Arthur Anderson at the time. She's also a good singer who has done some professional singing. Anyway, it was a weird internship that couldn't have existed much longer. My job was I worked in the call center, but I wasn't answering phones. I was receiving messages from the people who were working the phones. They looked kind of like receipts or like movie tickets.
Yeah.
And after I got 3 to 5 of them, my job was to walk up and down or use the elevators to move around the skyscraper and then hand deliver these messages. And they might say like, Karen, the Henderson report is 2 days overdue, ! Or they might say like, Paul, don't forget, our job is to bring the salad tonight. You know, just anything. And here you go, Paul. I guess it's like a perk. You know, you didn't have to like call in for your messages. A 19-year-old would hand them to you. So but this is, you know, then there was email later, and then you didn't need to do this. So, but anyway, I had this job, this weird internship for that summer, and I decided that summer, I want to do something creative that I can present by the end of the year, like to give as a, you know, to my parents as a Christmas gift or whatever. So I had a couple ideas, really. I mean, I thought maybe I can make a movie, because I had some friends who had, you know, video cassette recorders. But that was a little ambitious, you know, and I could kind of tell that wouldn't be a good movie. And I had some writing ideas, but I just sort of decided I think I could make a cassette, a 4-track cassette, because I had some older friends, a guy named Al Lehman and a guy named Terry Easton. I didn't know them too well, but I'd met them through that radio station I mentioned. And they had, at the time, they were Tascam or Fostex 4-track cassette recorders. They were kind of like the songwriter's demo tool, you know, so they were floating around a lot. So I asked them to help me make a cassette, you know, an album-length cassette of my songs, and I wrote some songs that summer and then throughout the winter and fall. They were kind of novelty songs for the most part. You know, I didn't take myself too seriously, but we had fun doing that, and they encouraged me to send them to some local press and maybe to book a gig, and those things happened, and they got, you know, some notices. So it kind of started as a lark, and I'd say maybe 3 years down the line, I was sort of thinking, maybe I could try to professionalize this. But it didn't immediately. That wasn't my first aim, you know, at least not acknowledged. I might have had something in the back of my head that dreamed about that, but I wasn't going about it strategically with an idea toward making it, you know, a professional thing.
Yeah. Have you always been a writer?
Well, I mean, I not really. I mean, I like to write songs. You mean?
Yeah.
Or
anything really.
Yeah. I had a certain linguistic facility, and I did like to write. I did well in English classes, and I did sometimes write something creative, you know, for fun as a kid. I started writing songs maybe when I was 15 or 16, but again, they weren't. For the most part, I didn't try to be self-expressive in these songs. You know, they were kind of like, you know, I had a song about grass fires. A lot of grass fires that summer. And, you know, it was just like they were kind of like ripped from the headlines, you know. Just, they were not, you know.
Yeah.
They were mostly kind of like not Weird Al Yankovic, but they were kind of novelty songs in a way, comic songs. And I think I tried to work with being so young. And, I think probably in the beginning, sometimes when we did start performing, some older people responded to it because it was kind of endearing, because I was very young. I was performing, I was 19, and the songs were kind of unpolished, but kind of clever, So it wasn't as if I was writing, like fully formed songs that you would play at a wedding.
Sure, yeah. All right. Are you a full-time musician, or do you do anything else, like income based?
Well, so let's see. I'll try to answer that question in the most honest way I can. So I have done a lot of different stuff. I worked in record stores and in theaters when I was in my 20s. My 30s, I kind of moved into writing. I wrote a couple of novels, and I worked as a journalist and as an editor. Didn't really play music at all during my 30s. That was also when our son was born, and a toddler and a little boy. So my wife's job was quite demanding. So that I did a little bit more of the sort of shuttling back and forth and some of the afternoon stuff with him. Then I worked as a freelance, and now I would say I do some freelance work, and I mostly work as a musician. I'm able to do that partly because my wife made some money in her field, so as long as we don't overspend on our own things. So to be honest, I make a little money playing music, but not quite enough.
Sure.
I wouldn't say that I make a living playing music, just to be honest. So I have that. Yeah. I didn't have that when I was younger, and if it weren't for that, I would still play music, but it makes it easier.
Do you feel like you have a large following? Like, I saw you at the Dakota, and it was like sold out, which is so cool. Like, I want to do that. That's so awesome.
I don't know if it was sold out, but it felt like a big house to me too.
Yeah.
That's nice of you to say. I mean, not really. It's a small following, but it's I think I've kind of clawed my way back to where I was when I was 29 and kind of hung it up. So usually for me, like if it's a show that I have to put a little more work into promoting, I'm hoping for 100 to 200 people. So that's kind of where I'm at in the Twin Cities. But then I have to also play some other shows. Might be a lighter turnout, or I probably wouldn't be able to exceed that number too easily. Sure. And then in other cities, I haven't really toured much lately. I used to tour when I was younger. It was a lot. It was pretty. There were a few places where there were some fans, but it was they weren't very concentrated.
Sure. Have you ever had a desire to play like a stadium show, or have you what was your goal really when you started taking it more seriously?
It's hard to say. I think that for me, the line between realism and defeatism can be a little blurry, So when I was younger, I was pretty savvy about how the industry worked, and I know some people who are like they have big dreams and a lot of self-confidence, and they're really undeterred by that. And I sometimes have envied that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say I was a little more like, well, most people don't make it doing this, and I don't really think I'm a very good candidate to pull it off. So the first part is true. Most artists don't, make a living with their art. The second part was a little more self-defeating.
Yeah.
So I guess my ambition was probably to be like, I guess on the grandest scale, like I thought, oh, if I could be Elvis Costello, that would be exciting, I think I said that to somebody once, and they said, well, yeah, but you're not as good as that, and I was like, okay. Which was also true, but I didn't really need to hear it. There were a lot of other singer-songwriters who were working on a smaller level, and maybe had kind of more of a patchwork of employment, like, I record and I do some production, and maybe I work as a side person or something. That maybe was a little more, Elvis Costello was really a rock star. But a guy I admire a lot, who is probably 10 years older than I am, is Joe Henry. He's a singer-songwriter who I know I've been influenced by to a certain degree, and I've followed his work. And he's I would say to me, he's kind of famous, but he's probably not, a household name. But he'll play clubs, and I don't know. I suppose someone like that would have been kind of a dream. He plays with really interesting musicians, and he has a following, but he's kind of able to pursue his own course. So something short of pop stardom that was still had some of the prestige or the status attached to, having a following throughout the country or even internationally. That was probably the dream, and to make, a living, or maybe have some years, this was a pretty good year, and maybe this year wasn't as good, but
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I saw you for the first time at the Cedar,
Mm-hmm.
and honest to God, it was like my number one show I've ever been to in my life.
Oh, wow.
I felt so moved by the whole thing. I mean, the whole set too. Like Abby Wolf and Eric Mason were there, and they were incredible too.
Yeah, they were great. Yeah.
But the set was great, and I know Zach Harris. Zach Harris is my jazz combo instructor. Right. And watching him play too it was everything. It was all of everything combined. But what really got me was the Scuttle Attic Story.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And will you talk about that a little bit? Because that changed me.
Oh, cool.
I went home and I wrote a bunch, and I told everybody that I know. Aurelio has heard the Scuttle Attic Story 12 times. I can't get over it, and what's funny is I can't replicate it. Obviously, I'm trying to. I had such big emotions about that, and then I was trying to tell people about it, and I'm like, well, there's a Scuttle Attic, and and I don't know how to explain it, but it moved me. Like, where did that come? Like, the way that you told that story with the instrumental behind you was part of it,
Yeah. So to give people a little more background, so with this group, we've done this now 4 or 5 times. Where so this is the small Dylan Hicks and Small Screams group. So we're a 6-piece group, and everyone's really wonderful improviser, technically, advanced musicians who are really great listeners and have a lot of experience. Either like Michelle, the cellist, has a lot of experience playing free improvised new music. Someone like Zach has experience doing that, but also playing over changes, playing jazz standards or playing his own tunes. Anyway, they're really adept at that kind of stuff. So I'll just bring in something. I have written it, and I have a text that I kind of have in front of on my keyboard, but I can't just recite it. So I'll sort of use that as a guide, and then I'll just improvise parts of it. And then sometimes I'll give them notes, like when you hear this phrase, maybe respond in this way, or when you hear this phrase, sometimes I'll even have some little notation like, oh, you could quote this melody. Yeah. That kind of thing. But it's very loose and very free. And sometimes I just try to have an arc, like when we get to this point, think about maybe getting more tonal again and maybe making it more pretty or whatever. Yeah. So the story was invented. I grabbed a few details from my life, but I didn't ever live in that apartment. A Scuttle Attic is an attic.
Oh my God, are you kidding? It's not real?
No, it's fiction, yeah.
Dylan!
I hope that doesn't deflate the whole thing. Oh my God,
that's so funny. That's crazy.
I mean, I think it's accurate in the sense that it's an invention that probably does describe some of my own feelings from when I was young.
Yeah, not every song we write is literal.
Yeah.
I get you.
But a Scuttle Attic, it's like one of these attics that you use a ladder or some other device to climb up to, and it's it could be a crawl space or it could be an attic, but I use this as sort of it was this place where the character in this piece could kind of retreat and play music and felt really transcendent. And then when he didn't have that access to that apartment, it felt like he couldn't recapture that feeling again. So I have had that feeling, and that feeling of like something's lost or something magical has escaped me. But I don't know, that I always get a lot of response. We did that again at the Dakota, the other show we saw, a different story. And
yes, I was there for that. I was curious about that story too.
That's a little more autobiographical, more literally autobiographical. So we always get a lot of response to it. I really enjoy it. I haven't tried to record or document any of those things, so it's kind of fun in a way that I don't always know what's going to happen, and I don't always know.
When I went home that night, I was like, man, I wish I could hear that all over again. Like I would, you know what I mean? Like, or if you ever did like a live record, that'd be so cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to
document that?
figure out some way to do maybe to collect enough of them and then try to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they would be how they would be mm, after multiple listens. I
Yeah.
don't really know if it's something special about you hear it once and then you're.
Yeah.
I don't know really.
Yeah. I don't know either. I think, yeah, it's also about the in the moment energy of the room
Right.
too.
And I kind of try to grab people by surprise because in my show. Now I look out at the audience. in my show, I banter a fair amount, and
Yes.
kind of. I do some between song banter, and so I try to make the sound of that banter and sort of the tone of that banter continue as I'm starting the story, and then the piece begins. And so you're maybe 30 seconds to a minute into the piece before people realize, oh, this is actually a piece.
Thing, yeah.
So that's part of the fun, I think. I don't know. I mean, it's been a fun sort of it's been a fun component of that group because, as I mentioned, I've written a couple of novels and I did a fair amount of prose writing, which I really liked. I can't really do music and writing at a high level simultaneously.
Sure.
I just don't have the capacity to put in the time to both, So it's been a way to, I do consider writing lyrics to be a literary pursuit as well, but this is a different kind of writing where it's, in sentences and grammatical and that kind of thing. So, but I'm also sort of improvising too because I'm not reciting precisely what I've written. So, anyway, it's been a good way for me to kind of have writing deadlines again too.
Yeah,
like I said, okay, I have to write something for that if we're going to do one of those pieces. So I better start that, now.
Yeah. So how many, do you have a handful of stories that you tell, or is it that you're trying to make up new ones all the time?
Yeah, I haven't repeated any yet. I'm just
Okay. Wow. That's cool too.
But we've only done it 4 or 5 times, they usually come last after I feel like I'm pretty well prepared on the music. I think I know the changes and I'm probably not going to make major mistakes. That's usually when I start.
Yeah.
So that usually comes together that week, the week of the show, But I might be thinking beforehand, I wonder if I could work with that material or, you know.
Yeah, I think there probably is something, even if you told the Scuttle Attic story every time, there'd be something to just doing that for a live performance. Like you don't get to hear that unless you're there. But yeah, having a different story for each one too, like the idea of the Scuttle Attic story never being told again feels deep. It kind of, you know what I mean? Like, wow.
Well, I probably will reprise them somehow. I just haven't figured out. For now, and I also kind of like the idea of the musicians responding to it for the first time and not think, oh, I did this before and that really worked. Let me do that again. This time they have to, discover things for the first time. So
there's definitely beauty and art in that too. That's so cool. Performance-wise, also that was a big part of why that Cedar show was so cool to me, was the banter in between. I wasn't expecting, and the dancing. Fuck, I want to be like that on stage. How did you become that? That's so, yeah.
Well, that's really nice of you to say. I mean, I've always liked to dance, I don't know. It's usually part of the show. It's not always a part of the show. There have been times when I feel like it becomes obligatory and then I don't have fun doing it.
Okay.
But usually I have a tune or, okay, this is the tune, this song, Try Thy Tharp is the song now, where usually that's the one where I'll put down I play a guitar on that one, and I'll put it down and then dance for the close. I don't know. I mean, I don't, I think when I was really young, and this probably is still true, I think there was a certain thing about the incongruity of how I look, which is to say, I'm kind of, I'm like nerdish, right? So, I mean, I was more so when I was younger, I wore glasses and I'm not, kind of slightly built and all this. So doing the dancing kind of the, sort of, it just seemed like that's not what they were expecting, So I probably played that up a little bit. I try to do that less so now and just like, I'm actually, like, to be honest with you, once in a while someone says like, oh, it reminded me of like Jerry Lewis or something like that. It's like, well, Actually, I thought I was good at this. He's joking about that, you know. So I really am trying to dance, but at the same time, it's not. There's something kind of scrappy about it because I don't. It's not choreographed and you know, and it's not really like dance music that we play.
Right.
But I don't know. I guess theoretically, it goes over.
Mm-hmm.
So you know that's one reason to do it, I guess. B, I do have fun doing it, and then also I think like, I guess this is not really the reason I do it, but at the same, I do think that like dance is an important part of the kind of music, the various kinds of music that we draw on. So
Sure.
I feel like referencing it, even though we're not playing music anymore that is going to inspire dancing among the crowd, but like I'm trying to come up with a blend so that it's sort of heady and sort of emotional sometimes, but also funny and also fun, you know, and to try to kind of keep those things alive at the same time.
Yeah. I recently watched your music video instead of this.
Okay, yeah.
And like did a deep dive on the lyrics.
Okay, yeah.
If you're comfortable with it, like, can we talk about the words there and like
the
process of that song specifically?
Yeah, well, that one came about a little differently than some because, so for a few songs on the record that preceded this one, and then for a few on this record, I went about things a little differently in that I just wrote lyrics, or I wrote prose or some kind of prose poems or something in a notebook away from an instrument, and that isn't so unusual. Sometimes people often ask, well, which comes first?
Mm-hmm.
Usually for me, it's always kind of simultaneous. Even if I'm writing lyrics away from an instrument, if I have a fixed meter and a rhyme, I'm probably singing a bit in my head anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm already kind of writing the music. You know, even if I haven't written the melody yet, or I haven't solidified a melody, or I haven't written chords. But this one I really wasn't. I was just writing, and then I would take that stuff and revise until I felt I could sing it. So there isn't a set meter and there isn't a rhyme scheme. And so that was kind of exciting. It was kind of fun to try to make music. As far as before I get into the lyrics itself, I mean, one thing that was fun about that was that I tried to chart it out as I would normally do, and I basically tried to chart it out in 4 with a few bars of like, oh, I guess this is sort of a bar of 6, because I kind of go on, you know, or I'd say rubato, and I was trying to like, and we kind of looked at it and we're like, it's just too irregular. Like, we're just going to have to know what word you're saying on the downbeats. So I said, okay, great. And so I think Zach or someone said, why don't you just play it and we'll just jot down what you're playing on the downbeats. So on the recording, you can hear people using pencils to write down the lyrics where they, they are on the downbeats, which was supposed to be our take, but the engineer came back and said, hey, listen to that first take where you were just trying to get the form down, edited with the third take, which you decided is your master take. And so he used like a minute and a half of that and then edited it. And I really liked that, hearing the pencil.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of thing I like about, things that happen in the recording studio. And as far as the lyrics, I don't know. I just like to play with language. And I was just thinking, of songs, for the most part, are first person monologues.
Yeah.
And so I'm usually thinking about a character who's got a problem.
Okay.
Is in distress or something's wrong, and the song is some kind of way to try to grapple with that problem. And so often I'm just trying to get at some of the most basic things like loneliness or alienation or sadness or whatever it is, but not so literally.
Yeah.
Because it's harder to make something seem transformed or of interest to the listener if it's like, if I literally describe my problems. Well, like this morning, someone said something kind of sarcastic on Facebook, and so I had to delete the remark and also unfriend the person. Mm-hmm. It's not high drama.
So in the process of like trying to make things less literal or more poetic, does it come easily, like metaphors for you, like, you know, for me, I'm just now trying to write songs, and everything I'm writing is very literal, and I feel like I'm kind of forcing the poetry a little bit.
Well, I should say too that like I made it sound like that was a rule. You know, it's maybe just my procedure, because there really are a lot of great songs that that are either they're quite literal or they use one metaphor. It's pretty direct, you know. So I don't know. I think that probably. And I think that, like, you know, for if you feel like, oh, this seems a little forced, or if you ever feel, and I have this feeling too sometimes, like, is this language passing for something poetic, but I'm not convinced by it? Usually I try to cut that, you know, and go for something more direct. I value clarity on the level of the line. In other words, like, I want the line to evoke something, like I can picture that, or like now I'm seeing the scene. But I don't necessarily need every song to be clear in its in total.
Yeah, I still don't think I know what it's about, and I've actually talked to a few friends. I sent it to them and been like, "What do you make of, like, what does this mean? Like, what does 'Can you hover like a kingfisher' mean?" You know, I don't know if I know, like, in that way, in that context. What does the song mean to you?
I mean, I think in part it's like, you know, the narrator is describing some things that would be much worse, that are fantastical, you know, in the first verse. You could think of it as like, I want you back.
Sure.
And especially that's like, what is this song? It's the same song, the same message as the Jackson 5's I Want You Back. Okay. And a lot of the lyrics are like that. And then a lot of the lyrics are, I have these needs. Could you fill these needs for me? You know, can you laugh more heartily at my jokes? And can you hover like a kingfisher? Like, can you basically, you know, hover there while I figure out what it is I need from you? So I think in some ways the character it's kind of understandable why the character is alone. You know, the character is not really maybe ready to be in a real relationship. Is sort of looking for someone to be a savior maybe or something. But to be honest, I'm not even sure if that's adequate. Not because the song is so complex, but just because usually I'm thinking more in terms of does it seem to add up when I sing it emotionally, you know? I don't always know that it's not as if I think, oh, there's a puzzle and there's a solution.
How did you decide that was the one that would become a music video?
When I heard it back, I thought there's something kind of strange about this, and it sort of seems different than things I've done it, you know. So I put it as the first song, and I think I may have, when I reached out to Jeremy Ilvasaker about, you know, just that, I may have given him a couple options. I'm not sure. I felt like this would probably be a better way to say, like, oh, this group's a little different. Than my other groups.
Cool. Did you already have a video concept idea, or did that come from the people that created it?
They did all that work,
Cool. Do you have anything to say about what happens in the music video?
I mean, no, they kind of directed it. It was hot that day. I remember that part. But it was fun. You know, it was. I usually with these videos, I haven't made a video every time out. You know, I've either asked an animator or somebody to do something, and I've usually just given them. Not that this is like an example of my, you know, largesse or whatever. I've just like said you have full autonomy on the project. Like I say, not because I'm such a great guy, but because I don't have ideas about it. And I always feel they'll probably come up with more interesting stuff if they're not like, I got a concept I want you to realize, you know, it's more like just do whatever you want with this. And
cool. So maybe the music video tells a different story than the actual song does.
Yeah,
maybe.
It could be. I mean, it could be. What's kind of cool about the songs is that, you know, I do kind of imagine that every song, even the ones that hew closely to my own experience, there's still a character and there's this sort of removed from my actual life. But I do eventually sing them.
Right.
If they're vocal. And So they're coming out of my mouth in front of an audience.
Yeah.
So there's really a lot more blurring
Yeah.
of like character and performer. And like you said with that Scuttle Attic show, in a way, I've done my job if I've convinced people that this is all real.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not trying to fool anybody, but, you know, I'm trying to make things seem authentic or something, you know.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like that blurring, like, you know, but you don't have as much, you know, in other forms where there's a more, like if you're writing theater, you're creating characters who are then embodied by actors, and everybody understands that there's this process of inventing and characterization works a little differently, you know.
Yeah. In these songs that you're writing that aren't necessarily about you, do you ever have a hard time like emoting it, or you just like find a part in there that you can resonate with and move forward with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that if the song has that kind of, if the song is meant to be, you know, expressive in that way, usually it's drawn from something, you know, some core theme that that's probably, you know, given rise to the song. And even the songs that seem a little more, like I Ain't Forgotten You is a song that seems like a singer-songwriter, like just laying it all out there. Again, the details are all invented.
Right.
But, you know, it feels a little, you know, I'm not sure. And also I don't want that for every tune, you know. I always think like, I think every performance and every album, ideally, I want to have something that could make someone cry. Not that like that's what motivates the song.
Yeah.
But like, I kind of want something that's emotionally direct.
Sure.
At least one thing. Maybe there are other things that will be that way too. And I can only say that like those are the hardest to. You don't sit down and write those.
Yeah.
You know, like I can sit down and write material, and I don't feel self-confident in every aspect of my life, but I do feel like if I have the time, I will be able to compose something, and it may not be great, but I can do that. But I can't say, you know what I'm going to do this Wednesday? I'm going to write a heartbreaking ballad. That usually won't happen.
Yeah.
Those will just kind of come. And so I'm like always really grateful when one does come, and like I'm like maybe every couple of years, I'm actually having a hard time performing this. Like I'm getting emotional, and I have to kind of learn to perform it and kind of remove myself from it, and then eventually kind of try to reclaim that emotion by recalling it. You know, that sort of process of sort of, it's too raw, and then you're fighting back, and then you try to kind of remember the feeling, you know, so.
Yeah. Are you right now writing for another like upcoming album, or what are you working on right now?
Yeah, I've got a lot of stuff going on. So as far as that project goes, the Small Screens project, I haven't done a lot of writing. I have one tune that I think will be cool, and I just have to kind of come back to it. And we're going to do some recording in the summer, and then again, probably, I'm hoping over the holiday break. A lot of the people in the group teach, and so sometimes taking advantage of the holiday break is good for scheduling. And that project is going to be kind of expansive. We're going to bring in a few, for some of the material, 3 additional horn players, and then for some of the material, 3 additional string players. And then I've asked members of the group to write arrangements for a tune each, and then also a friend of mine, J.C. Sanford, is going to write 2 horn arrangements. So that'll be another way to kind of expand the collaboration and take advantage of, you know, they're all really good at that kind of thing. And, you know, so I don't think we'll be able to perform that more than a couple of times because it'll be a lot of people on stage and it'll be kind of expensive. So, but I'm hoping that we can do that and then maybe have a special performance or 2 where we, you know, bring in some of those extra people and kind of let those arrangements, you know, live outside the studio. Cool. So that's one thing. Then I'm in a kind of a more of a groovy rock group called Munson Hicks Party Supplies, where I write the songs, or most of the songs, and then my friend John Munson does most of the singing.
Okay.
And so did a little writing for that recently because we have a show coming up at the Dakota. Zach's in that group too, and then at least for this show we have Noah Levy playing drums and Kevin Castongwe on organ. Kevin's just one of my.
Oh, we know Kevin.
Yeah, he's like one
Everybody
of my,
knows Kevin.
He's a great guy and also like
Yeah.
one of my local keyboard idols because he's so
Yeah, you know who Kevin is, right? Yeah, yeah, he's
Great.
the dude that we saw at Dakota. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he's a great
incredible.
player and also like very humble and really easy to get along with and so there's that, and then I have another project called Pipples, which is spelled PPLS, but that's with Michelle Kinney, the cellist you saw in that group. And we're kind of, I have an original that I've contributed to that, and I think Michelle will write some for it too. But mostly we're interpreting things from all over from far-flung sources. So a few jazz standards, but a lot of like pop tunes, and we'll do. Like we're doing Glenn Campbell's Wichita Lineman that leads into Drake's Hotline Bling because they're both phone songs.
Yeah.
And they have there's some similarity in terms of key.
Okay, cool.
So I don't know. That's been really fun, and it's kind of fun to work with. We're gonna have Ted Olson play bass with us when we play our show at the White Squirrel coming up. But for now, we've been rehearsing just as a duo, and it's a different experience for me. I haven't done a lot of. There's a fair amount of improvisation, not necessarily conventional improvisation, like, all right, now you take a 32 bar solo, but like just in terms of the arrangements, like, oh, in this part we do this, but we don't know exactly how it'll go.
Yeah, cool.
So that's a little bit out of my, it's not really my training, so it's been fun to do it with Michelle, and it's really kind of addictive because when it happens and it feels right, it's kind of intoxicating, like, oh, I don't know how we did that. So that's not something I hope we would eventually record something, but that might take a year or so before we have enough things. And finally, I have a thing that I'm putting together called Therapeutic Massage Cassette, which is an instrumental project that I sort of intend to have kind of a, somewhat ambient, atmospheric sort of bent. And we are going to put the music out on a cassette only. Well, I'll stream it too, but
cool.
So
that's awesome. So
fun. This is that. I haven't been that way before. Usually, I've had one project, and now I'm kind of like embracing the idea of like, well, I can only play as myself.
Yeah.
So frequently, or else I saturate the market.
Right. Yeah, it's nice to be involved in a bunch of different groups.
Yeah.
It's fun that way to be connected to multiple people in the area and work on different projects. Like to have, I really appreciate working in different groups where I have freedom to try out different genres or whatever it is.
Well, and then also I don't know if it's the same way for you, but this way I have some project where my leadership role is pretty defined, and other projects are more collaborative, and I'm co-leading, and so different. I like having that different role and not always feeling, it's just,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the question that I'm asking every guest is, how do you define success?
Yeah, and you prepared me for that. So I've been trying to think about it. In a way, I've been thinking about it. I think Zach said the same thing when I was listening to the episode you recorded with Zach, Baker. You kind of think about it your whole life, but I was trying to think of something a little succinct and coherent that would work on the podcast, and I may have failed to do that, which is maybe apt.
That's okay.
But I was thinking about like different vantages, from which you might look at success and try to evaluate your own success or measure your success. So I don't know if this is like a class, a taxonomy that we can all use. But for me, I was thinking there's a level that has to do basically with status. And that could be fame and wealth and prestige. So obviously it could be, what a pop star enjoys. Yeah. And they might enjoy all those things, like Bob Dylan or Beyonce is they're enormously famous and wealthy and also kind of revered and prestigious in that way too. Yeah. Some pop stars maybe have the first two things, but they feel like they don't have the recognition they want, and they're maybe express this resentment in interviews. They don't, they're not truly recognized. And then you could have prestige in a smaller community, like I listen to a lot of jazz, and a lot of people are jazz famous. They probably don't have trouble with autograph hounds at the airport, but
Right.
they might have all the things that really that give you a lot of status in that community.
Right.
Maybe that's they're great players, they're great composers, but also maybe they have a prestigious teaching position at a highly selective school or music school or any school, or they get the great gigs at the Village Vanguard, and they get acclaim even from mainstream press and all these different things, festival gigs, but that might not add up to usually if you're kind of all those things are happening at once, you're probably making a pretty decent living, but it might be kind of precarious.
Yeah.
Like when COVID happens, you might be like, well, I didn't have a lot of savings,
Yeah.
And it's more like a poet could be very famous, and you could be at a certain party where Claudia Rankine is here,
Yeah.
but she might not be like most people haven't heard of her, right?
Right.
So there's that, and then even smaller, you could be like, I am the preeminent steel guitarist in Seattle. Now that's not the preeminent steel guitarist in Nashville.
Yeah, right.
But you're probably pretty good,
Yeah.
If you're the first call steel player in Seattle, you're probably a pretty smoking steel player, and you could get a fair amount of status, from that. It might not feel like it's enough. Maybe you think, well, that's not what I dreamed about. I dreamed about touring with Willie Nelson or whatever,
Right.
But I think that's all these. I think that's one level. It has to do with what kind of validation and affection and sort of what the love of the community and the world am I getting?
Yeah.
And I think that most of us, want that. There are some exceptions. There's some famous artists like Emily Dickinson is often mentioned. The great poet who. A few of her works were published in her lifetime, I think, because she corresponded and she shared some poems with a correspondent. But she didn't really seek that out, and she may not have wanted it.
Sure.
So I think there are people who, I don't know her I know her poetry more than I know her biography, but I think there are people who like to create and like to make art who aren't thinking and then I will be acknowledged for the genius I am. But I think it's rare. I think most of us kind of want some of that. I think there's a sort of cliche that there's some kind of emptiness within artists they want filled by, the love of the world will make up for this gap that I feel in my childhood or my own life, whatever. That's a little bit of a cliche, but there's probably something to it. I know that personally in my own psychology, I think that I have a good social life, and I have a really harmonious and really loving and sort of deep relationship with my wife and other family and my son and my parents and some good friends.
Yeah.
But I'm not looking for a lot of, I can only have so much intimacy. I'm not necessarily looking for more and more and more friends.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I probably do want some of that, oh, these people like me, but I don't feel obligated to
Yeah.
we don't have social obligations to one another.
Yeah.
Not sure that's always healthy, but there probably is a little bit of that, that you're trying to, and I know that when I was a teenager, this is a very classic sort of narcissistic teenager kind of thing, but, I wasn't an only child precisely, but I grew up sort of like one because with my stepfather and mother, I was their only child.
I see.
My parents, my biological dad had other kids, so I would sit in my room alone and listen to music often, more than play it. And I would sometimes fantasize oh, if only my classmates could see me listening to this great, cool music and reacting to it in such a emotionally astute way, they would really know who I am, That's a kind of teenage thing.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I think that some of that lingers. You're still kind of thinking I'm going to write this song and I'm going to perform it, and it will reveal that I'm interesting or that whatever, and that I will be rewarded for that and validated for that. It sounds, when you kind of express it like that, it sounds kind of embarrassing, And I think there is this element of embarrassment, I think, to artistic creation in the sense that it inherently kind of exposes that need.
Yeah.
In some ways, if you're making it public, there is probably some part of you that wants the world to
validation or
yeah. It's definitely not you can be cool, like you can be a cool musician or a cool actor or whatever, but it's not as cool as not as indifference. Indifference always is really cool. Like I don't care what happens to this. I just did it, and I've never really been able to be that way, like, so anyway, I think, so in terms of that, there's definitely been times in my life where I have felt like a failure, like I feel like, well, I feel like the world has spoken and they just haven't spoken loudly enough in favor of my pursuits, and that's not from the distant past, that's last year. And then you pass out of that, or I'm able to pass out of that, and I might feel really self-confident,
Yeah.
And hopefully, hopefully those extremes aren't too low. Like you don't get to the point where like, I feel so defeated by this that I don't want to do it ever again. Or I am so, like you become delusional about how good you are.
Yeah.
And you can't see where you need to improve, or you can't see your defects. So there's that aspect. I don't think that I haven't been able to like mature out of that, unfortunately. Then there's, I think, a more pragmatic level, which is just, can I make a living doing this, or can I help support myself, or can I help support my family, or, and that's really challenging. I mean, a lot of my friends who do that, it's a real patchwork of, I'm teaching this, I'm doing private lessons, I'm gigging, I'm recording, I'm running this operation, I'm curating this concert series, and I'm working at a guitar shop or whatever it is, it's a lot of stuff. It might all add up to something. So that's a real challenge. And I think sometimes people might say, what I really want to do is mainly I just want to play my own pieces on saxophone. In this market, I can't make a living doing that. There's just not enough work for people to hear my original tenor sax pieces in Minneapolis. So I'm going to find another source of income, and then I'm going to do this as a serious thing that I do. And I think there's, not to take away from the work that people do to become professional in a financial sense, but I think there are other ways to professionalize music. I think if you kind of develop an audience and you try to present, you work hard, you try to present like a show that has been worked out, and you write your material with care, or you interpret it with care if you're playing other people's music. And maybe you have a mailing list, and you have you kind of do a lot of self-management, or you're booking your stuff. Those are all aspects of professionalism. It might be that, okay, and through all that, I made $7,000 this year. That's probably not going to go all the way, But I think that, you don't have to feel like, well, that's not being a musician. I'm not a musician then because I didn't,
make X amount of money. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I feel like you can, and for that matter, you could be a great musician whose musical outlet is to get together with friends once a week and play. There's no. So anyway, I think there's that sort of status stuff. There's the more pragmatic, like when I was about 29, I had said, I don't think I can do this anymore because I'm not making money. We're thinking about having children, and I just quit for almost a decade, because, and it was a little hard in the sense when I came back to it, it was really painful because I felt like I've decided that this failed, I'm giving up. But it led to this other work. I worked as a journalist, and then it kind of led to those novels. And I think that experience kind of made me a little more, I approached lyrics in a different way, and I kind of approach lyrics more like I'm writing them and revising them a lot.
Sure.
Like maybe I used to do with the other kind of writing. I lost a lot of time, and it kind of took me a while to kind of get back to where I feel like, oh, I can sort of play again.
Yeah.
But I think that's normal too. There might be periods when you just can't do it. You can't afford to do it,
Yeah.
And I try to to go back to our earlier conversation, I try to be self-aware about, the privileges I've had in terms of like now being able to pursue, music that isn't all, sometimes it pays for itself, but sometimes it doesn't. That's not a luxury that most people have. And even before that, when I didn't have any money, I still had a lot of people kind of in my corner.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really hard, you know, I think for a lot of people to get their ideas out there. And then I guess, you know, maybe another way of another advantage is kind of a more romantic sort of aesthetic, sort of individualistic. Like, I just want to feel like the work I've done is, I feel good about it. You know, it might not be, usually when you start something, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be great. And then you finish it and I'm like, oh, it's going to be this.
Yeah.
That's a little different than what I had in mind. But, you know, hopefully you still feel proud of it. And, you know, I like the process of sort of, I feel good about this song, and then I feel good about what the group did with it and how we transformed it. I don't feel equally good about everything.
Right.
I've never like put an album out where I say, well, every song is of the exact
yeah.
same quality. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always feel like every song probably justifies its documentation. Maybe later I'll decide, maybe not. But you know, but anyway, I mean, I think that, you know, that's in a way that's sort of how I've made a lot of my decisions. I mean, it helps too because, like, I mean, one advantage of obscurity, and certainly there are disadvantages, but one advantage of relative obscurity is that it does afford you a fair amount of freedom, you know, because I don't have, it's not as if like in the 70s, Lou Reed made a record called Metal Machine Music, which was like this weird music, concrete noise record, double album. That was, what is this? You know, I want a Lou Reed record, you know. And it became kind of famously like, what was he, did he mean it, or why did he do this? But he had enough fans where it was like kind of like, there were a lot of people to alienate. I don't have that problem really, you know. I mean, I do want to give people something they want, but like, it's not as if like, I do have a lot of leeway because the audience is small and you know, so I'm mainly trying to do things that seem really stimulating and like, you know, challenging, and kind of like, I just read something last night about, I can't quote this accurately, but it was something that Gustav Mahler apparently said a little later in life, something like striving even later in life to feel like a beginner. You know, and I like that idea of kind of like, what's the project that feels possible?
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to take on something that like, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write, going to write a symphony played exclusively on tree bark. I can do it. But at the same time, I don't want to be like, for this project, I'm just going to do the same thing I've always done.
Yeah.
If it feels like, I don't know if I can do this, I'm a little frightened by it, that's kind of normal advice, to be a little bit, to kind of put yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone or a little bit on edge. But I do think that's exciting, you know, and to have to be a little anxious about whether or not you're capable of it is kind of, can be motivating.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I have so many things that I want to say about that, but we are running out of time.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I feel like
no,
I talked
that's
too
okay.
much. And
No,
we didn't get an
I have
exchange
like
going.
17 follow-up questions, so maybe you could come back.
I will come back. Sure. Yeah.
Because this was great. I really want to know, before you go, like, major artists that influence you as a musician, as a writer, singer, pianist, all the things.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty big list. I have a lot of favorite artists. I started, I don't know if I was collecting them, but my parents would buy me 45s when I was 7. Not every week, but like once in a while we'd go to Kmart and I'd, you know, and my mom or my stepdad or somebody would let me buy a 45, and I had a little portable record player. So I've always loved records. You know, records are really, I have a lot of them now. I used to work at record stores, and I worked as a music critic, so a lot of them came to me for free, and I just love records, and in a lot of ways that's what motivated me. I want to make records because I love records so much. So it's a real long list. I don't have a single like Polestar kind of artist that, if I hadn't heard this, I don't think I'd be doing this. I didn't have that experience exactly. When I was a little boy, my first sort of pop hero was Barry Manilow.
Okay.
Do you know who that is?
I don't.
Okay, yeah, no, he was a big star in the 70s. So he was a piano player, so there's some continuity there. He had worked, he was a songwriter, he'd written jingles.
Okay.
And like, I think he wrote I'm a Pepper for Dr. Pepper or something like that.
I've never heard that one.
Yeah, you wouldn't have heard that either, but he wrote a couple of jingles that people had heard if you
Okay.
would listen, if you watched.
I'll Google it.
Yeah, I might be wrong about the pepper, but
Okay.
some jingles that I had heard when I was growing up. And he played in the New York City bathhouses for Bette Midler before Bette Midler was famous. Barry Manilow is gay, but was kind of not open in the 70s. And I think because of homophobia, a lot of times, he wasn't always taken so seriously. And some of his music was really great and really, he's a good singer, good player, good writer. Some of it was pretty schlocky. So it was kind of it is kind of a mixed bag in terms of quality.
Yeah.
But he's a really charming performer. And I just, as a kid, I just responded to him a lot. It's one of my first things. So I loved Lionel Richie too. And the Commodores. Yes. So there were some people that were kind of, and Billy Joel, like, I think Zach mentioned. I think a lot of people who played, I'm older than Zach is, but, a lot of people who, I wasn't much of a piano player, but a lot of people who played piano, it's like you're looking for people who play piano before that are on the radio.
Yeah.
But then I was I was just crazy about, I just wanted to know as much as I possibly can, and like, I would look at record guides and try to buy every 5-star record from this jazz guide or this rock guide or whatever. And I did a jazz show as a teenager and a hip hop show then. I was really blown away by some of the hip hop that was coming out in like the mid 80s, late 80s. So it's really been really all over the map. I would say that I'm pretty democratic in the sense that I love a lot of music that's kind of high art music and like,
sure.
But I also love a lot of really mass culture music that's doesn't seem so sophisticated. And I think that's one of the things that's so great about music is that it can come from, and I just feel like ideally, I'm still kind of romantic about music as a way to bridge cultures and to learn about other people's experience and to become more broad-minded. I think that,
absolutely.
And for a lot of the music I like is Black American music, or it's at least derived from Black American music. And I think it was through music that maybe led me to, this tune references this James Baldwin novel. Maybe I should see who James Baldwin is or whatever. I don't know. I think it kind of broadened me a little bit. It was a good entry point to kind of get a better sense for, I don't have the sense I ought to, but a better sense for the, this country and its, history and the diversity of its people and all that.
Awesome. Okay, well, before we say goodbye, do you want to plug any upcoming shows or any other things that you want the viewers, listeners to know about?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I guess I have 3 immediate shows. Okay. This group I mentioned, I'm not sure when this will air. This group I mentioned, Pipples. We're playing at the White Squirrel Bar in St. Paul.
Oh, the White Squirrel.
Yeah.
We're frequent White Squirrel goers.
We're playing a week from tomorrow.
Okay, yeah. Is
today Wednesday or today?
Today is Wednesday.
Yeah, a week from tomorrow we play there.
Perfect.
That's a little low key thing, but I'm excited about that. It'll be our first full gig. And then I have a gig March 7th at the Astor with the Small Screens group. So that's with a friend of mine. Well, he's an online acquaintance. I mean, he is a friend, but I don't know him in person yet. Named Lincoln Barr. He was touring, so he was asking if we could set up something. I wouldn't normally have 2 gigs in a week. It just happens that would happen. So we're playing there on Tuesday, and then on Friday with the Months and Next Party Supplies at the Dakota. Cool. So
good venues.
Yeah, there are 3 different
awesome.
groups. No overlap in terms of repertoire.
Oh, wow, okay.
So, I mean, outside of a promotional context, I wouldn't really expect people to come to all 3 shows, but you could, and you wouldn't see any of the same
Well, maybe
thing.
we will.
You might see the same thing broadly.
Aurelio seems interested in all 3 shows, so maybe we'll see you at every single one.
I mean,
it's already penciled into the calendar.
Yeah.
Okay, and then where can everybody find you on social media, or where can they find you on Apple Music, Spotify,
Yeah.
what you under?
Just under my name on Spotify or Apple Music. There are a couple of other Dylan Hickses, but there's a picture. There's a picture. You'll probably find it.
Figure it out.
Bandcamp too, Dylan Hicks Bandcamp, and that has all the projects that are under my name as well as projects that aren't, but that I was involved in. That's just a self-released records and stuff. And then I'm on Instagram and basically on Facebook. I left Twitter during this whole Elon Musk thing. I
respect that.
I don't know if it was now I'm kind of like once in a while I'm like,
I miss Twitter.
It wasn't like before. I thought the reason I'm on Twitter is because I morally approve everything on Twitter.
Right.
But he was sort of like, it reached a point where I was like, maybe I should not.
Yeah. Okay, we're way over studio time right now. But what is your Instagram handle? Unless you don't want people to find you there.
No, I do. I don't know. I think it's the Dylan Hicks.
Okay. Yeah, just look it up. Like, just do a quick Dylan Hicks search
I think it has to
the
be
Instagram.
The Dylan Hicks.
For sure, I
don't really believe that I am the Dylan Hicks,
but Instagram says so, yeah.
That's what I chose. I guess I did want that. I did want to feel like I am. There's a really good drummer, Dylan Hicks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's based in New Orleans, so he's another musician. Once in a while we get confused. But I'm kind of a pioneering Dylan.
Don't stop that, Aurelio.
Cut me off.
No.
I was just looking.
Most of the Dylans I meet are young.
Yeah,
they're in their 20s. It's a common name now.
Yeah, I know. I probably know like 5 Dylans.
I was called Dylan when I was growing up a lot.
Really?
Yeah. Which I thought.
Okay, let's get coffee sometime and continue this conversation.
Okay, yeah.
We have to say goodbye, but thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
This was too good.